Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. My guests for this series are Nduka and Peter Midgley. Nduka is an associate professor and graduate program coordinator at the Institute of African Studies at Carleton University in Ottawa, Ontario. He's also an author and co-editor of 8 books on creative writing and academic research. But we'll be talking with him about his latest collection of poetry, his third, called DisPlace, which was published in October 2021 by Wilfrid Laurier University Press. Peter Midgley is an independent scholar, writer, and editor who worked with Nduka on DisPlace. This 4-part series is brought to you in part by Wilfrid Laurier University Press. Nduka's poetry deals with the politics of language, ideas of place, the diaspora, and the colonization of knowledge. His poetry is conversational, spiritual, and performative. If you closely consider the title, DisPlace, you'll notice the pidgin pronunciation of this place, but also displace and the simultaneous feelings of belonging and detachment, where you are now and where you once were. It's a direct reference to Nduka's Nigerian background and points to a characteristic of his poetry that is, as Nduka calls it, beyond world literature. In this 3rd episode, we talk about the many avenues of thought that are opened up in considering the collection's title, DisPlace, and how being on sabbatical during COVID influenced the tone and themes of some of Nduka's poems. Nduka, the title of your collection, DisPlace, is a play on words, so to speak. Can you talk about the ways in which that title can be interpreted?
The title aims to do 2 things. One is to speak to the whole idea of my life as somebody who has migrated across spaces, but also to speak to specific space. For example, the word originates from two words, 2 pidgin words, which are also English in a sense. And this is what Peter was probably hinting at about the new Englishes,
Yeah,
how
right.
colonized people have actually appropriated the English language and put a spin on it, that they come out with words that with time, also become part of the mainstream. So DisPlace, from a Western point of view, it will be read as displace, like in displacing somebody. That would be your natural encounter with the word. But it's been dismembered, as it were, and reassembled. So it comes from 2 Nigerian words, 2 Nigerian pidgin, this place where we are, we are in Zoom, this place, Zoom. And so in doing that is a play on location and the idea of how within the global moment and through migration and all of that, we can be speaking of one place. Say we're speaking about Ottawa, where I am right now, but we're also speaking about other places. So it's just beyond one specific place. We're also thinking in terms of being displaced and then placed, in a different place. So there's emphasis on the idea of space, of migration, and of new experiences, and then also of the challenges of home. The very complex relationship with home. That in being transplanted, as it were, you are also not necessarily being displaced. We can go on into a whole lot of other layers, but I'm also interested in seeing how Peter has engaged with the idea of the title of this poem, Peter.
I'm going to come with this from it's obviously it is about dislocation, the idea of being separated from, and of course, as he points out, dislocation, this place. It ties into another question that I know that has come up about conversational aspects. From the very beginning in this book, we're led into a conversation. We want to label this as a conversational tone, as if this is something new. But when William Wordsworth says, "I wandered lonely as a cloud," we've already been pulled into a conversation. That is already a conversational tone. Yet we don't label it there, but we want to label it here. So again, I have, it's these perspectives and categorizations according to perspective that really bother me. But because the conversation, right from the beginning, we are very firmly located. The very first word in this collection is here. Here. Here where his body knew the earth, in the antechamber of birth, wherefrom he came with the red earth innocence, he comes again, a wanderer in search of the word capitalized. So right there, we are located here. And it's not a defined space here. So we are invited now to join a wanderer on his journey. This is the person who says, come over here, look, right here.
Right.
It doesn't matter where we find ourselves physically, we are located by words like that. And we're also invited into a conversation, in this case, with the capital letter word. The book of John starts with the words, in the beginning was the word, in the Bible. So right from there, as much as we are located in an African context here, where the body knew the earth, we are also pulled into a different metaphysical concept of the word and a different philosophical concept and tradition. And we are having a conversation between these two in every poem. So how is it conversational? It is conversational in that we are reminded of these tensions and these dialogues that are happening between different intellectual traditions.
And then I just also wanted to re-emphasize the fact that the title is also aimed at evoking the poet's sense of in-betweenness, or the interstices and the alienation as experiential challenges in the diaspora. So as I had begun to say early on, it allows me to think about the tensions between placement, displacement, and emplacement. And this also has its spiritual parallel, in terms of what happens as we move through life, the relationship between life and death transition to the eternal, where we are ultimately. And I think in one of the poems, I'm not sure it's in this selection, but one where we talk about death, and the tomb, the difference between the womb and the tomb. So I am continually thinking about this process of transition, like an ever and like an endless transition, which we go through perpetually in life. And that's also what happens with our experiences as we move from childhood to death, and in the case of African belief systems, also to the hereafter. And so Peter is right. There are those allusions, a very densely allusive style, which I use consciously, both to the African spirituality, also to the Western Christianity. I'm a Catholic. And these are some of the terms of references that I use, even in the title of this work, to evoke them as much as possible. I'm happy to see that with Peter as my first reader, some of the ideas are actually being interpreted the way I imagine it should.
Yeah. I love how the title carries so much weight for the book. And I'm wondering where it might have come into play as you were working on the collection, if it was something you were thinking about, like the actual title ahead of time, or if it came closer to the end as you were finishing up the collection. Because it's a great title. It just works so well.
Yeah, so I would like to say that, when I was thinking about the title for the collection, it took a while, and I bounced it off with my friend and the mentee, Peter Uche Umezurike, who is with Peter in Edmonton there. And he suggested a title, actually. He suggested DisPlace. So I said, oh, he suggested it in the conventional sense of the word. And I said, that's the word I'm looking for, and I spliced it because I knew what I was hoping for. Sometimes it's like a poet who is shopping for the right word for an idea, that the words that are coming to him doesn't quite capture the essence of what you're thinking. And so when he suggested this in a very conventional DisPlace, so I said, yes, it's DisPlace, but it's not quite that kind of DisPlace you're thinking about. And when I spliced it, I saw that, oh yeah, I got the combination of the Nigerian pidgin of it and the English part of it, and then, came up with this. So yes, it was at that point of the initial selection, and I think this helped in finally framing the entire collection. Once we had this title heading into the editing, then it made it possible to cohere the various strands into bearing out this vision.
And I was actually very excited when I saw the title for the first time, because it resonated with me as well, because curiously enough, in Kaaps or Cape Afrikaans, the term displace is exactly how it has exactly the same connotations as it would in Nigerian Pidgin. So there's a Pan-Africanist moment here that joined up these texts that really resonated. And the whole idea of displace, dislocation is so prevalent in so much of African writing from the diaspora that it resonated, and it captured the essence of this collection perfectly.
Excellent.
It also bears out, it's very important to emphasize and underscore the accents, in this word. It is DisPlace, not displace. And an opportunity like this that you're offering with this platform helps us to begin to help people to understand how to call the title. It is DisPlace, not displace. And I'm also like to point out that by the time we tested the titles, some of the other titles with the series editor, Dr. Tanis McDonald, and then also the managing editor and the acquisition editor, Siobhan McEnemy. They both were, also it resonated with them. And I thought, just to underscore the idea that it is this place. And the displace is a secondary way of looking at it. So it's a bifurcated pronunciation that aims towards the main objective of the collection.
Okay. And Nduka, the selection, as you mentioned earlier, partly came about when you finally had some time for reflection during your sabbatical, which coincided with COVID and being sort of locked down during that. What are some of the things that occupied your thoughts during this time?
During the time, I think many of us, I don't know about you, but many of us were frightened about death, in the sense that COVID became like a death sentence, and there was that kind of closure, there was panic. If you had some kind of foreign object, that emerged from space, these days space is not as scary as it used to be, because there are excursions into space that is going on currently, and would even be more so. But if you imagine aliens, it was like some kind of alien had emerged in the world and was about to decimate everyone. And this fear, this dread, was there. We had our last program, which was our 10th anniversary of the establishment of the Institute of African Studies. And we just managed to escape the lockdown. It was a final, I think it was like 2 days after that the Canadian government or Ontario announced the first lockdown. And so that period, as I said, coincided with my sabbatical. And I was already, in fact, I had written some letters thinking that I was going to travel to do my sabbatical. And some of them were already actually crystallizing. And being holed up here, at home, enabled me to engage in more introspection, right? So I was reading more poetry, and I was also writing. And I began to write more for publication. And I've written one article, a couple of articles that I really liked, including one that I write on bird watching, which I enjoyed as well. And I was looking through the internet, and you're seeing animals that were being scared from the cities, becoming part of the city because they were deserted streets, and they felt very free to roam. So looking at these images were so touching, very profound. And within the period, I didn't quite mean it that way, but I discovered that some of the poems I was writing again, the new poems were very, very sad. They had all of this recurrent theme of death, of transition. And there was nothing I could do about it. I didn't set out to write any unhappy poems, and I didn't have experience that was going to make me write any happy poems, as it were. And so it became some kind of catharsis. It became a process in which I was able to expel, to heal, to also free
Mm-hmm.
myself from the dread. And as I did that, I wouldn't say I became more comfortable with the idea of death, but the fear was conquered.
Yeah.
I began to also realize that, this looks inevitable. This is the way life is. We're not expecting to end the world in a bang, but it was actually happening in a whimper, where the best of science was challenged.
Mm.
And, where we dread nuclear weapons and all of that. And here was biology and nature. No matter what we thought about it, the origins of this coronavirus, the new coronavirus that's now better addressed as COVID. It was such a threat. It is still very potent, in the world today. And as we speak, much of what we thought would happen with the vaccine, is about happening right now. With people in Africa, disproportionately at this moment dying from it. And even if it's complicated by other things. So whereas the cure, not a cure at this moment, but a vaccine to help manage it, as in found in the Western world, it's also interesting to see how the politics of vaccine, is going on and how this reaches to save lives. And so the process of writing became for me some kind of therapy. And I think pretty
Mm-hmm.
much it's what we think about when we write. Do we write out of the impulse for happiness, or are we impelled by sadness? I wouldn't know what Peter's experience has been. I work on both, but I discovered that sadness, and tragedy seems to inspire me more to write. And this was the case. And this was a context in which almost predictably this whole idea crystallized into this new book, this collection.
You just heard from Nduka Otonyo, an associate professor at Carleton University in Ottawa, Ontario, and author of the recent collection of poetry called DisPlace, published by Wilfrid Laurier University Press. Also joining us was Peter Midgley, the collection's editor and an independent scholar. This episode is brought to you in part by Wilfrid Laurier University Press. Join us next week for readings and discussion of two of Nduka's poems, and Peter and Nduka dive further into what they mean when simply deciding what language to write in can be a radically political act.
Language is politics. I mean, in many cases, we don't see it that way, but language is politics. The moment we enter the realm of language, we have entered the realm of cultural politics, because there are languages that are marginalized or silenced. There are languages that are going extinct. And what happens when a language is extinct? And also, what happens when, due to certain historical forces and existential forces, people are made to switch their language from their original language to a borrowed language?
If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media assistant, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.